Well, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for the delay, and I apologize to those online for the delay, too. Our projector that's typically in here is out, and so we've been trying to get a projector that would work for this room, and this is our third attempt at a projector. We finally got one to work. We're having some issues with the volume for videos that we'll show a little bit later, but we'll try to work through that. Let me open up the PowerPoint real quick here. F5, escape. From the beginning. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being here. You know how discombobulated I am? I don't even have a joke ready. So I can't believe that. Except for the one, you know, I got to tell you about this really cool word I just invented. Plagiarism. Yep. And in case you want to know what the definition is, I'll tell you about that later. So anyway, I'd like to welcome our speakers. I'd like to welcome everybody here and those online to this overall presentation on self-driving vehicles. This is an exciting time. It really is. And I don't want to say anything because they might be talking about it a little bit later. But we're going to have Frank Dalma and Adil Lari talk about this overall subject. They're going to switch between themselves. And just as a quick introduction for them, Frank Dalma is a research fellow and associate director of the state and local policy program at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and a research scholar at the Center for Transportation Studies, both at the U of M. And he's been involved in a lot of areas. He's worked at the Humphrey School, Canadian Pacific Railway, Metropolitan Airports Commission, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. He's worked in a lot of areas. Adil Lari is a director of innovative financing in the state and local policy program at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs. He joined the university after more than 30 years with MnDOT, so we welcome him back into the building. He started at MnDOT. His career at MnDOT started at one of the first traffic management centers in the world as a system design and traffic research engineer. So he's been really involved at the cutting edge ever since the beginning. So with that, if you'll help me welcome Frank or Adil, who's going to be first? Frank, if you'll help me welcome Frank.
Thanks a lot, Ken. It is a pleasure to be here, and this is a lots of fun topic to talk about. Adil and I have been doing this particular research project since the beginning of about 2013. And one of the fascinating things is that their developments in here happen so fast that most of our information comes from news reports or not necessarily academic journals, something in between, sort of contemporary media. And it also is a great opportunity if you want to get published because nobody else has been there yet. So it's been a great project to be involved with. The field, though, is getting popular. Everybody from the car manufacturers, and we just have sort of a representative listing here. We couldn't fit everybody onto the page. To technology companies jumping on board, trying to move forward on this technology of the self-driving car. And it's created a lot of buzz in the research world. Still early stages, but everyone from Santa Clara Law Review to the Eno Center. Sorry. We have an example here of how technology can work. And something we'll talk about later.
Everybody was sleeping, they're not anymore.
Something we'll talk about later is the ability to test these things before they go live. But let me jump into what we're talking about when we say self-driving vehicles, because these technologies, that term tends to cover a lot of different technologies, and there's a lot of actual different terms out there that people are using. The way to kind of think about it is we're talking about the degree of automation versus the degree of cooperation. By automation, I mean whether the technology just gives you a warning that it notes something's wrong, control assistance, where the car actually will do some of the steering or take other action in cooperation with you, or full automation, where the car does the driving and you have become basically a passenger. And then the next thing to point out is that when I talk about the degree of cooperation, that is in direct opposition to degree of autonomy. If you look up autonomy in Webster's, it basically means that the car is independent of needing other information. We had a seminar on this topic back at the end of October, and our dean, who is an international human rights expert, did the opening, and he pointed out that he was all ready to start talking about autonomous regions and the rights of cars and this kind of thing until we pointed out we were talking about technology, and autonomy has a slightly different point of view there, but it does mean basically independent versus cooperation, which is the technology depends on information from other vehicles or the infrastructure. So autonomous warning systems are basically the low end of this kind of technology. And if you move up to things like adaptive cruise control, where the car is able to slow down because it notes, your car is able to slow down because it notes the car in front of you is going slower, all the way up to vehicles that drive themselves based entirely on the information they're able to receive and process. Moving on the cooperation side, you have intelligent speed adaptation, cooperative collision warning systems, which is more of a V-to-V. Basically, the cars both realize that there can be a collision coming, and they warn the driver is all they do. Cooperative adaptive cruise control, where again the cars are talking to each other about what is going to be the proper speed for them to react. All the way up to the automated highway system, which is an idea that's been around for probably at least 20 years, that the vehicles would talk to each other, they talk to the infrastructure, and because of that information they would be able to drive themselves. Google's cars, you've probably heard of, they're entirely independent. They're fully self-driving, fully autonomous vehicles. Commercially available technologies, you can get them as options now, tend to be in the some level of cooperation and just in a level of warning perspective. And then connected vehicles, the V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle technologies that NHTSA is considering proposing mandating rules, mandating the installation of these technologies. That's down on the far right, but still on the level of warnings. Another way to think of this, autonomous, self-contained within the individual vehicle. That's Google's cute little latest version. It does not come with a steering wheel, accelerator pedal, or brake pedal. And then connected vehicles, when we use that term, this is when we're talking about what has usually been considered when you're talking about ITS and the development of those technologies where the vehicles are talking to each other and to some extent to the infrastructure. What our work has been thus far is we've developed a white paper looking at various implications of self-driving technologies as these mature, as cars become more and more able to drive themselves. What would be the implications generally, and what does this mean for Minnesota? I've been working with the DEAL on this since the first two areas we're going to talk about are safety and engineering and travel behavior and planning. Why don't we turn it over to the traffic engineer to talk about those points? So at this point, I'll turn it over to Adil, and he'll walk you through our findings to this point on those issues.
Well, thank you very much. You know, if you are a traffic engineer once, you are a traffic engineer always. And I started my career as a traffic engineer. And I was wondering who will be here I will be able to recognize. And Craig Heckrell was with me in Traffic Management Center, God, 1970 someplace. So I was there for 10, 11 years, a traffic research engineer and traffic design engineer. And then coming to this building, most of you don't know, I was responsible for finding this building, leasing this building, and building it. So I moved everybody here, and everybody hated my guts to move them from Oakdale and Golden Valley and central office. but I think most of you are settled here. Anyway, whenever, where you go? Next, enter
Just tap the mouse.
the mouse. Okay. Passing of the House. In mid-90s, I was responsible for implementing congestion pricing, and I was the project manager for building toll roads. And that time I was speaking nearly every other day, was speaking why we should be building toll roads and everything else. And I was telling everybody that, hey, if we don't build toll roads in Minnesota, we will have congestion in 2015 just like in California now. And I had not made it up. It was some very well-reasoned studies as well as Met Council's suggestion that we will have 1 million more people in the region by 2015. Well, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Same way, it didn't happen that when was that? In 1894, Times of London said that if we don't do anything, by 1950, we will have 9 feet of horse manures on the city of London and New York. There was a conference in New York for 10 days which were going to consider what they're going to do with horse manure. And after 3 days, they gave up because they couldn't consider, they couldn't figure it out. So whenever I hear about congestion, anymore people say the congestion will get worse and worse and worse, I only think about horse manure. Because what happened, that a human intelligence and human ingenuity always comes over and basically find the solution. And think about that when 1894, the Times of London was talking about horse manure, we already had the diesel engine. We already had the steam engines. But they couldn't believe, and Americans couldn't believe, that the horse-centric society of America will ever give up their horses. You have not seen many presidents of the early 19th century without their horse and riding their horses. So that was a horse-centric society. Now we say that we will never give up our automobile. We are an automobile-centric society. I think that new technology is always comes over and we move forward. But most of the reason people talking about self-driving car is because of the safety. And these are the numbers you know very, very well. All of us know that in Minnesota, 2013, 387 fatalities, 30,000 some people injured, about 77 some injuries. And the economic cost of it is $1.58 billion. That was 2013. This year, it has been now moving around. I was reading someplace it might be 350 this year. But look, United States, we have 33,000. But sometimes we forget, we only look at United States, look at the worldwide. 1.25 million deaths worldwide in 2010. And 50 plus million injuries that year. In 20th century, the automobiles caused 60 plus million deaths. So when we had a conference, somebody was saying that if we were introducing the car today, FCC probably won't let us introduce the car. Because they will say, hey, you can't cause 60 some million deaths. You cannot kill 1.2 million people every year. So that's a major reason behind, and I was really surprised once I was attending a conference where the Google came and made the presentation. They only showed 4 or 5 slides. I was expecting they will talk about technology and everything else. They only talk about safety. They said that's the reason we are doing it. And that's one of the reasons I don't believe that the regulators will be able to stop the development of it. So why the safety benefit? NHTSA and all that has studied, and a few other studies talks about that the 90 plus accidents are caused by the human error. And, and the Volvo calls them 4Ds: distraction, drowsiness, drunkenness, and driver error. Well, computers don't do any of those four. So it anticipated that we should be able to reduce and eliminate some of those. But caveat is that what will happen when we're moving from the way we are today to fully autonomous cars? There will be transition. And in the transition, there will be caveat that how we're going to integrate with the driver. So if we start driving and become more and more dependent upon automatic brakes, adaptive control, lane issues and everything else, that whether we will forget to respond to the warnings. So how we will be able to resume the control of the car. So those are some of the challenges we will be facing. But it will significantly increase the capacity of the road. We built 12-foot lanes. Now we are doing some 11-foot lanes as well sometime to increase the capacity. But the car is only 62-inch wide, current car. So we have a lot of space around it. So we could put more lanes in the same infrastructure. So increase the capacity. Also the gap reduction, we have a lot of space between car in front of us. If they're talking to each other, they'll automatically react. Reaction time, we talk about 3-second reaction time and all that stuff. To do that, if you can eliminate those or reduce that significantly, you can have reduced the gaps. There's also the merging issues, You are aware that what issue happened with the capacity reduction in the merging. If you could do a much smarter merging, and if the cars are talking to each other and you can do it smartly, you can have increase the capacity there as well. There are some studies has done regarding the intersection and bottleneck management. There was a study done that if the cars were talking to each other or recognizing each other, they could increase the capacity of the intersection. They will anticipate which is coming, which is going, and they will be able to merge much more smartly. So what are the benefits? This is one of the General Motors ads of the 50s, So the issue becomes the free time or travel time. What will happen? Obviously, there will be extra free time if you are sitting in the vehicle and you are not driving. You have basically found some extra time. So that's the issue. Looking for parking, with a lot of people spend looking for parking in urban areas, so that can be eliminated. Better fuel consumption for multiple of the reasons. One is for the drag issue. Also, if the cars are not slowing and accelerating, that will reduce it. Also, if the cars are not getting into the accidents, the car could be much lighter, could be much smaller, so propulsion don't need to be as strong. So that will also have a better fuel consumption and environmental benefits. And also the land use could be changed as well. Substantial part of our urban landscape is used for parking. And if you don't have to park the cars, that can make a big difference there as well. People say, why you will not need a parking space? The automobile ownership model might change. Maybe it will be just like a taxi. It will be roaming around and basically available to you when you need it. The other use is the use of the mobility, expanded user base. Although, somebody was saying very soon we probably will not be driving, at least I will not be driving forever. So that's what my personal interest is, that I will have more mobility because of those. Disabled children. I still remember not long ago I was driving my kids to the soccer games and going to schools and everything else. What will happen when the car will be able to take them there itself? You don't have to be run as a mother's taxi or father's taxi. So it will provide increased independence and decrease the cost of the travel as well. Vehicle diversity, instead of this diversity we are talking about, there might be a very, very different cars. You know, you could be a very, very small vehicles to very, very large vehicle depending upon the usage. Now it becomes, you know, at the present time we have a model of every house has a 2 cars, 3 cars, in the United States now there's a car for 1 car or more than 1 car per person. Don't have to be that. If you have the availability of the vehicle whenever you need it, wherever you need it. So it'll be maybe a fewer car per family. But then the fleet could be owned differently. Maybe it becomes like a rental cars. Some company, just like a internet capacity as you need it, you have 30, 40,000 cars, and it is floating around, and depending upon the modeling, that where the cars will be needed. And you can just order it. You can Siri, need a car, and the car appears there. So there could be public-private ownership, could be shared vehicles. You know, I'm sure you are reading about Uber and other shared automobile model is already there. It might be more so. And the changes in the cost of the travel. In the travel time itself is a cost. So what happen that there will be less effort, you will have more time, more efficient gasoline use as we talked about, and change in behavior. Now there is an issue comes. Some people say, well, if you don't have to drive, maybe you were living far away. But that only assumes that our model, ownership model is the same and our tax model is the same. At the present time, what happened, there's a huge fixed cost for the people. We buy a car, we pay fixed, doesn't matter how many miles we drive, we pay the insurance, doesn't matter how many miles we drive, we pay the tax, vehicle tax. But really the cost of the car per mile is only about 55 cents. That's the IRS estimate or AAA has estimated. Think about if you have to pay 55 cents a mile, how much you will drive every time. People say, well, rich people live very far. I have not seen many rich people who depend upon maybe taxi living very, very far. So, you know, not everything will stay the same. If the model changes, and every time you have to drive 30 miles or 40 miles if you live in the suburbs or way out, and you have to pay 55 cents a mile, and suddenly you say, holy macro, it's going to cost me $30 to drive there. Will you do that? So those things need to be considered as well when you're thinking about what the implication might be. So there might be more commute length change, travel frequency will change, as well as also rule adherence. You know, I think computer probably will not speed as much. So the issue becomes, you know, parking, urbanization, urban sprawl. None of us know what will happen to that, but whenever we are thinking about it, we have to think about that everything else is changing around us as well. In 15, 20 years or 10 years from now, when these autonomous vehicles will be with us. The model will have to be changed. You know, you ask your kids, I talk to my kids, whether you want to give up your car or want to give up their iPhone. You know what the answer is usually. They rather give the car rather than an iPhone. And similarly, so that's the issue, you know. When we grew up, we used to talk, you know, when 16, 17-year-old, the first thing we wanted to do was to get into a car, because that was provided us the independence, the freedom. But now they have a freedom with their 2 thumbs. They don't need a freedom of the car anymore. More and more kids now getting the driver's license at a later age than we did. And it is because that's the different freedom they have. So this is a model of actually, it is in Dubai. They have those vehicles at the airport. You can order it and take it. And Frank, now you.
So now that we've heard some of the exciting opportunities, I get to come in and talk about a few more of the hurdles that remain. And I won't even mention a thing about the technological hurdles that remain. Just thinking about some of the policy issues, first of all is the question of who's really in control of these vehicles and who has the responsibility for that. You may have heard that back in May or so of 2013, NHTSA issued a policy statement where they essentially took their own take on a couple of other schematics of how you can think about the control of the vehicle of these cars. Level 0 would be back with my 1987 Dodge Omni. That was my first car. It didn't do anything I didn't tell it to do, and sometimes it didn't do what I wanted it to. But that would be considered level 0. We are now in a kind of maybe a level 1 world, possibly moving to level 2. If you have heard GM talking about some of its 2017 model year Cadillacs coming out. Volvo and Mercedes similarly have some technology coming out that have some controls actually being done by the car better than we would do, and the car takes over. If you watched the Super Bowl, you saw that Kia had something that was sort of a high level 1, where or it was Hyundai, not Kia, where the guy is learning how to drive and he gets distracted by seeing his classmate over on the sidewalk, and before Dad can even tell him to slam on the brakes, the car stops before they get into a crash. The real areas for excitement and research here are level 3 and level 4, and the question being, how do we make this transition where we cede ultimate control from the operator to the vehicle itself? And what kind of tasks are we talking about? Well, there's a lot of things that we're actually supposed to be doing when we're driving, whether we realize it or not. From seeing objects to planning where we're going to identifying the conflicts that may result and just monitoring the mechanics of the vehicle. And where this gets interesting is when you start to look at the liability questions. The questions of, well, who's responsible when some of these duties are not adequately handled? We're talking both criminal and civil liability. I'll just talk very briefly about the criminal liability side, which is the when is it going to be acceptable to say, I'm sorry, officer, the car did it, not me. And if the car really did it, we've got a question of how did the officer even manage to pull you over in the first place? Will the officer have the power to take over the control of your car and pull you over? Or will you have to still somehow be notified that for some reason you are wanted by law enforcement to pull over to the side and have a little conversation, and you therefore have to take some action to be able to do the pulling over? That's a question that's not resolved yet. The civil side questions are even more complex. You have to define who's really going to be the one responsible, what the fault is, and what the compensation for being at fault is. In the large category side, what we're talking about is whether the operator remains responsible or if we're moving into a world of products liability and the manufacturer is responsible. If it's the manufacturer is responsible, there's currently 2 tests out there that are applied in court cases. One is the risk-benefit, which is what it sounds like. Does the benefit of the technology as it exists outweigh the risks that it poses? If indeed that the benefits are higher than the risks, then there is no liability to the manufacturer. The other is consumer expectation. Did the technology perform in a way that the reasonable consumer wants it to? And to flip around my verdict here, if it does not behave as the consumer expected it to, then the manufacturer is liable. So if it sounds to you those are somewhat fact-based and could end up resulting in a lot of lawyers getting into some very expensive litigation, you're right. The advantage is that it can be often class action type suits, and so it would apply on a wide scale once a decision is given, but it's not nearly as efficient as the have you been injured in an accident 1130 mom and pop plaintiff firm type of personal injury case. There are some opportunities legislatively to address those questions, to move this along if there is an interest in making the technology develop faster. One, which the manufacturers would not like, is the idea of imposing simply strict liability. This car has self-driving technology. Something goes wrong, the manufacturer pays. No litigation, don't worry about it. They build it into the cost of their technology, and away we go. The other side of the coin would be to say, this is a safety issue. As Adil pointed out, the huge number of deaths that occur is because we're not really doing what we're supposed to be doing when we're driving our car. This is as important as developing vaccines to keep the spread of disease at bay. In the United States, we have protections for companies that develop vaccines so that they will not be liable as they are developing the vaccine, or the liability is limited. Maybe you want to do the same thing for developing these kinds of safety technologies. The other thing to look at is, when might the operator or the owner still be liable, i.e. the person? Maybe you don't say that it's always going to be a situation of product liability. Maybe you say that the person who owns the car, or the person who last had an interaction with the car, is the operator, and the car is merely acting as their agent, simply doing what it was told. And because the car did something wrong, as a result, the person who last had contact with it, they're the one who's liable. Or another way to encourage development of the technology and protect the companies would be one to create a system where it's simply maintenance is the responsibility of the owner. And so if something goes wrong, the owner has to pay through their insurance, because they need to be paying attention to whether their technology is functioning properly. And on the other side, it can always be vicarious liability. I did everything I was supposed to. I can't pay the damages that are out there, and so then you can go back up to the manufacturers who may or allegedly have deeper pockets. And finally, kind of a hybrid is simply to say owner is liable up to a certain level, statutorily declared, and then after that we'll litigate it out. But that again could clear up some of these gray areas of liability and allow development to move forward without some of those questions about worrying about lawyers. Now, another question is the amount of data that these cars are collecting. Who has access to it? Who owns it? And what is it saying? And this gets down to ultimately a privacy question. Privacy is on one side, data is what, and how you're using it is the other, and in between is how do you make sure that only those who have the need and the access to particular kinds of data are getting to it. Kind of like on the liability side, it first comes down to a risk-benefit, cost-benefit type of question. How much do you really need that data? How much does that data identify a person in order to accomplish a particular purpose? And if that purpose is not so important to be able to basically have your fingerprint identified and broadcast to the world, then maybe you don't need it. But on the other hand, there are lots of ways to accomplish these ends that Adil talked about without basically letting the world know exactly where you are and who you are every moment of the day that you're in one of these vehicles. There are some other things that can help build confidence. Set time limits for the data retention. it's probably necessary to have that data for at least the moment that things are happening. In California, when they passed their self-driving car law, they said that the data must be retained for 30 seconds. But beyond that, sure, there could be lots of uses, and to my next point, there could be lots of other folks out there that would love to have that data for their own purposes, but for the purpose of making people feel confident they're not being tracked, you can set by policy or set by law how long the data is kept and who can sell it or not sell it or buy it. Ultimately, in the United States, to protect privacy, you get somebody to say, yeah, I agree to share my data in order to get this benefit. Who has not done that by simply clicking agree without even realizing it on the internet? You're actually helping to move along the development of technology while giving consent to share some of your personal information. That's the easy way to go. Why wouldn't we want to say, I'll agree to give up some of my locational data so that I can have this car drive itself and I can happily text, because I'm telling Apple where I am anyway. Internal data practices, companies can, again, have their own policies, and indeed, the AAMA, Association of Automobile Manufacturers, at automotiveprivacy.com has just released a set of privacy principles that basically state when they would and would not use data that identifies users of their vehicles using this technology. It's fairly simple, fairly primitive, could probably use some more iterations as it's going forward, but it shows the commitment of the manufacturers to respecting the wishes of those who might use it. And then implement privacy by design. What I mean by that is if you think about the vehicle-to-vehicle types of technology that may be mandated, you could imagine that it is the car saying, I am transporting Frank Dauma from point A to point B during this period of time along this route, so please do not hit him. And all the other cars will be transferring similar amounts of data, creating a massive web of we know where everybody is at any time. But really all the vehicles need to know is I'm a vehicle at this point moving in this direction, and I'm another vehicle moving at this point in this direction, and that the road is slick or it's not slick, or I'm about to hit something or I did hit something that was not a vehicle. That is basically anonymous information. And the data can be encrypted so that the vehicles understand each other, but it can't be so easily picked up unless you're a really, really good hacker. And so if you design the technology to simply do the basic, achieve the basic aim without trying to collect all this other information that might be nice but create other issues, you've accomplished sort of a privacy by design perspective, and something that it can, again, build the confidence of the users that it's truly to their benefit and not some ulterior motive. Now, there's some other legal questions I could get into. Adil mentioned the end of the mom-and-pop taxi. You think about it, would you feel confident putting your kid on the bus right now to go to soccer practice? And if you feel comfortable with that, then eventually you might feel comfortable enough to put them in the vehicle and send it on its way. If that's the case, who would really need a driver's license? Because the kid is now able to go where they need to go just by ordering up a car. Would you really have even a driving age or even need the driver's license? And then the question of, if that's the case, how long can we still require the humans to be the fail-safe if something goes wrong? Or if the weather turns bad and the car says, I can't handle it? If we're increasingly relying on the car to handle most situations, are we really the best alternative for when the situation suddenly requires some very skilled attention? So those are some other questions that need to be resolved. Nonetheless, there is progress, there's initiatives. It's premature to say the technology is here, but I think you can say it's coming. And Adil and I'll turn it over to Adil to talk about what might be some ways to move forward here in Minnesota.
Yeah, before I talk about the opportunity in Minnesota, I show you these numbers, and United States, annually about fatalities about 35,000 people. But total worldwide is 1.224 million. That means 97% of the fatal accidents are happening outside of the United States. So there is a serious desire, not in the United States, the outside, interested in doing autonomous vehicles. And they are not only American manufacturers who are interested. Actually, the manufacturers in outside this country are more active and more advanced. And our manufacturing, auto manufacturing, is basically quits now. We have only 2 manufacturers left. And the other day I was looking at it, comparing the automobiles to the technology company. And I look at the Google, just in the cash on their balance sheet is more than the value of both of the automobile manufacturers we have. As far as car sales are concerned, last year, China alone, we had 12 million sales. In the United States, only 9 million. So they are the bigger user of the automobiles as well. So we can argue about all the legal ramifications in the United States. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. Because autonomous vehicles, if they are coming outside, we will be behind. And we will be following the world. And that's happening in technology as well. There is a big jump. So in Africa, they didn't have the phone systems. Then cell system came. They have a faster cell connections than the United States because they just went straight to the south. So just keep that in mind. And that's what is happening all around us. One other stat I like to talk about, that all the automobile manufacturers in the world combined together, their cap, that value of all the manufacturing, is less than the value of the Apple computer companies. And not much more than the Google. So if the Google want to make it happen, it's going to happen. If the technology companies want to make it happen. You never heard about the Tesla till 2 years ago. Consumer Report just rated them the best car ever made. So that's what's happening around the world. Anyway, so what's happening in Minnesota? We already have example of high-tech snowplows in Minnesota. So we should look at it, if the technology is happening, all this development is happening, what the Minnesota can do, what role we could play. The Google says that they have having a hard time with the snow conditions and all that. I remember the cars used to go to the way up north to test their batteries. Maybe we can offer to do some testing in Minnesota in the snow condition and the cold conditions. And Volvo can test their car in Gutenberg, why not we? So I think we need to think about what role the Minnesota will play into this. Do we have a connection there?
Yeah.
I'd like to show you the...
Okay. One
Okay.
second.
Okay.
For those people online, I'm going to copy this web address into the chat box, so you'll be able to watch it that way. So just be aware that you'll be able to look at it at that time while we're watching it here. So let me quickly, I'll pull it up.
There are hundreds of videos on YouTube now. You just Google the autonomous cars, you will find it. Unbelievable amount of stuff. Some very, very interesting stuff. What the Mercedes is doing, what BMW is doing, what Audi has done. Audi just recently, just last week, drove in a NASCAR track, just fully autonomous vehicle. 160, 170 miles an hour. And if you know the NASCAR track, it is not an oval. It changes the speed, directions, and everything else. Also, I got opportunity to ride a Google car last year. They won't let me sit in the front seat, so I have to sit in the back, and I couldn't take a picture inside. But it is fully autonomous in the sense that it doesn't use any map. It's basically using all artificial intelligence. It can see everything around it. It can see the people, can see the cars, see everything, and then basically makes a decision. This one is a really interesting video, you find. You might find
self-driving cars are science fiction. But the reality is that already today we're testing self-driving cars like the one behind me in real traffic on roads in Gothenburg, Sweden. So right now we're in the prototype vehicle and we're driving in Gothenburg on a typical road that a lot of people use for their daily commuting. And I can show how to activate the system. One simple press on a button and the car will take over the braking, the accelerating, but also the steering. In this case, I still will have to supervise the system because this is an early prototype. But our intention is that in the final product, a driver can actually release the steering wheel without having to supervise, such that he or she can do something else with their time. The car uses radar, camera, and LiDAR technology to monitor the actual environment around the car. The sensing has to be so robust that drivers can rely on the car to drive in a safe way. It also uses a map of the roads that we're traveling on. So we use a communication link between the Volvo cloud and this vehicle in order to get the latest map data to this vehicle. We do analysis on traffic safety, and we've done so for many years. And we know from this analysis that almost all collisions that occur are caused by human error. If you would automate driving, you take away the causes of many accidents, and you can make traffic safer. It's great to be in Sweden, because in Sweden we have a very good cooperation with road authorities. And this is crucial for bringing self-driving cars to the market. At Volvo Cars, we have the objective in 2017 to actually bring 100 self-driving cars to our customers on real roads here in Gothenburg.
In Britain, they put a £10 million towards just any city who want to test the autonomous vehicle, and it's happening other places as well. Questions now, right?
Unless you had more slides.
No, we are done. More than happy to answer any question from you.
Slides are going to be made available or not, but
Yes, the slides will be made available.
we do have links to some of the other ones. That was obviously Volvo's. Audi with their Grand Prix run is down here in a Wired magazine article that you can click to a video. Mercedes, Google's, and also there's a V2V focused video that we have come across as well.
The Volvo using the mapping, but most of the people believe that the Google must be using their map because they have very good map. They say no, that's completely artificial intelligence. That map which is available to you and I, it is not actually to the level they would like to have. Question?
Any questions?
I was talking with, and I'll stand close so people can hear it, so you don't have to repeat this question. The model here is if you repeat the question, we'll be able to do that. But I was talking with Peter Buchan, and he had mentioned he was talking with a Google person who had been talking about their systems, and they said the area where they need the most help is work zones. Is that something that you've heard, that's something, because we are changing the environment drastically in a work zone, and so that's got to be a challenging area for the self-driving vehicle.
Yeah, I heard the same thing from them. They would like to have because obviously, they can recognize it, they can recognize the signals, they can recognize the signs and everything else. But work zone, they would like to have a little bit better information. At least they know that they are going to have the work zone, that they can adapt to it.
What do you think is going to help expedite this? Do you think if the legislators take action and kind of give a framework for people to develop technology around that? Or do you think it's better to just let the market dictate what they'll produce by what people are going to buy, and then us try to figure out our systems off of that?
So the question, and correct me if I don't get it right, is what's going to be the best way to expedite this, whether we should have proactive legislation or we should react to what's going to happen in the market. I go to the RAND report, which essentially said, collaborate, don't overregulate. There are so many unknowns out there about exactly how this will behave when it gets out in the street that too much legislation will more likely create confusion and slow things down. But there is, I think, a place for getting into the conversation, being a place to test things that are not currently being tested, and showing that there is a friendly environment to helping develop it. The model that Adil mentioned from Great Britain, where there is incentive money put out there to try and attract the business opportunity, might be the greatest thing that can be done right now on behalf of the public sector.
And a lot of other states, Iowa is looking at it, and the Texas is looking at it, Florida is just having a conference on that with DOT is very, very active in it. And so a lot of other states are looking at the business opportunity or economic development opportunity.
California is kind of leading the way. They've got the law as well as issuing comprehensive rules. Nevada was the first with the law, also some rules. They're quite a bit more simplistic, and then Michigan, D.C., and Florida also have laws saying it's okay. But I don't know that it's necessary to have legislation to say it's okay to have the vehicles out here if really what you're looking for is the opportunity to create the environment where they would be useful.
One thing I was interested in was transit. Transit spends about over half their costs is on labor, drivers. Have there been any push by transit operators to implement this type of technology? It seems like that would have an opportunity to reduce their costs, perhaps. I'm sure there's drivers unions may argue against it.
Yes, like trains now, a lot of trains have,
Repeat the question.
Yeah, no, sorry.
The question was, what about the opportunities for transit in particular? Could that greatly reduce the operating costs by reducing the need to have a driver in the train or the bus?
Yeah, and I think there's a great opportunity. The train, labor unions are the ones who have been pushing back in that regard. You don't have to really have a driver in most of the trains, but they still use it. So, but otherwise, I think technology is. And, another thing I forgot to mention, U.S. Defense Department is very, very engaged in this particular initiative as well. So you can imagine how that would benefit to them, having a self-driving vehicles going to the front.
There is one policy hurdle with that, which is there's, I think it's at least colloquial, called 13C. And if you want, I can, I've got my contact information here on our very final slide here. I can give the actual site, but there was a federal law passed at the time that transit services were moving from private sector to public sector that basically said that this cannot be done as a way to basically shed jobs. It protects, there can't be any major change that would have a great adverse effect on the jobs provided by the transit agency. That was done for a particular purpose, but it's still on the books, and it could conceivably be used to argue against self-driving transit vehicles. So that's one legal piece that would probably need to be made aware of and addressed as this comes forward.
Yes.
One of the slides, or one of the things that you had mentioned earlier, is this: what's going to happen when people don't know how to drive cars because we're doing autonomous vehicles? And I have initial gut reaction against that. But I got to tell you, I don't know how to ride a horse and tell it where to go. So I'm sure that would have been a similar argument in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I think I agree. The question was, what about as people lose their skills? Wasn't that the same thing that happened as we transitioned from horses to cars? And people became more adept at driving cars, and we didn't need the horses. Probably the case. It's my personal opinion that the V2V technologies, which is going to basically, as I understand them, give us a warning of some sort to tell us when the car is aware of a problem, we will start to get used to the idea that the car is aware of a potential issue lots faster than we are. And that's going to build our trust in the technology. And as that happens, that will help us develop a higher level of interaction with when the technology is doing fine and when it's not. And that will help us get to that point of how we do the handoff so that we trust the car and that the car will be good enough to handle nearly every situation. But it'll evolve over time. And that's probably the main point, is that it will take time, and just a matter of how quickly we are still required to have the skill. Are we going to still be expected to be responsible for our horses on the highway, even after the cars are able to do most things?
If they don't have a steering wheel or a brake pedal, what the hell are you going to do? So it doesn't matter what your skill is. You put me in a car, it doesn't have either one of those. I can't stop it. I can't make it go. Turn it.
Right. Question was that if you're in one of those Google pods that doesn't have a steering wheel or a brake pedal, what are you going to do in the first place? That's exactly right. However, in California, in their rules, they made it illegal to operate those Google pods on the public roads. They still want a human fail-safe. And in Michigan, in its law, it says, yeah, you can test them so long as there is a human sitting in the driver's seat at all times. So that highest level of technology cannot be tested on the public roads. Fortunately, there are military bases, other large empty lots, and even Google's campus are all private. And so the testing is continuing on those. But right now, the law is that you have to have a car where the human takes over.
But we are designing our roads like 20, 30 years ahead now, according to what I heard. And I believe that in 20, 30 years, maybe most of the vehicles will be able to drive operating fully or partially. So are we thinking about or looking forward how to change our design or our traffic forecast or the safety features? Because that's what we are designing roads to a time period where most of the cars that we are designing them today are not on the road.
The question is that we are designing the road for next 20, 30 years. So whether we are considering the impact of autonomous vehicle on the capacity and everything else, as well as modeling. I remember writing a note to Met Council about 3 years ago, asking them to add this into their modeling or scenario planning. But Met Council says that, you might have a 20-year plan, but they update it every 3-4 years. So it becomes, if they recognize it is coming, they can change that. But you are absolutely right, we designed the roads. And, I still remember looking at the traffic volumes in 1975. I was driving, and I looked at the 35W projections we did in 1960. 58, when we were building the roads, we were way below what happened. So we used to be, for a long time, underestimating. But I feel, personally, that now we are overestimating. In my personal opinion, we are building a bridge to nowhere, to Stillwater Bridge, and we continue to do those things.
One of the things that I read in a blog that was an interesting thought, and maybe it just has to be decided by the courts, but at some point there may be a case where a computer has to decide between one person dying or 3 people dying based on an action that it does. Is that something that will have to be resolved by the courts, or?
Well, that is another one of the ethical questions that even I haven't gotten into. And the question is the streetcar dilemma done in the autonomous car level of choosing to take out 1 person or 5 people. There is no everybody lives scenario. Even to the point, you could take that to the point of, does the car decide to take itself off the cliff and its driver or occupants with it so that it doesn't destroy a bus on the way?
Kind of the Kobayashi Maru.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
That's a Star Trek reference.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, when you're talking about self-driving cars, I think probably most people know Star Trek. Anyway, it's a tough question, and I have not heard any definite answers as to the best way to go, because when you're dealing with a human driver and a bad thing happens, they either do it to themselves or they've made some choice, and you can handle that. Here you're talking about some sort of pre-programmed decision that basically you get into the car and you know that if it gets into the situation, it may decide to kill you, which is not a comforting way to think about getting into that car. And the way the liability would work out would probably just have to be hashed out by the courts. That kind of gets to the risk-benefit model of, did the risk to the few people, was that less than the benefit that came to the rest? And if so, then maybe liability is not going to be so prohibitive as that you can't go forward.
It's a rare, has to be a rare case. 99.999%, you'll never have to worry about that. But humans, we got to think about the worst case.
And it's the same thing as, when something goes wrong, it's going to be something where somebody does, it's not their fault. And that's a little bit of a tough thing to get your mind around once you, when you're otherwise talking about these great safety benefits.
Any other question? Huh? Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
it. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Frank and Adil. This is a very fascinating subject, I think. One of the things that I heard at a presentation at the transportation conference, some futurists were talking about the ramifications of self-driving vehicles, and one of them was the insurance industry. Many people are employed by the insurance industry, making sure that people have insurance for their cars and handle claims and things like that. And if we've got a safer overall infrastructure, there might be ramifications just of that insurance industry. So this overall issue is huge. So anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for making it today. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the PowerPoint and the presentation will be online. So we'll have the presentation online where you can look at the hyperlinks. In addition, we'll have the recording of this presentation as well. So thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next month.
No.